Hi everybody, welcome to Right to the Top. I'm Adam. In today's video, we're going to look at vocabulary a little bit more. And today's topic specifically is the environment or environmental issues, pollution, etc. I'm going to look at environment in general, give you some good words to use when discussing the environment. We're going to look at pollution as a specific issue and the consequences of pollution or environmental actions, bad actions that people take. And we're going to look at these because these are the most common aspects of the environment that come up in IELTS and essay topics for essays, okay? Now, this is not a complete list. There are a lot of other words that you can find and use, but this is a good collection of words to get you started. Now, if you haven't already started working on an idea bank, I highly recommend that you do so now. You can make an idea bank for environmental issues and start with these vocabulary topic, these words I'm going to give you, and then work your way up, make more, collect questions, etc. If you're not sure what an idea bank is, here's a link up top here that you can follow to find out more about that and start working on it. So let's dive in. Let's look at the environment. So here are some good words that you're going to use when you're talking about general environmental issues. You're going to talk about biodegradable. Now, biodegradable, or to degrade, means to break down into smaller parts that can be reabsorbed by nature. So when we're talking about bio means life or organic. We're talking about organisms. So we're talking about organic materials, things that you can basically throw out in the garbage, and nature will somehow recycle by herself into usable nutrients again. So again, when you're talking about food, if you throw out your apple core on the street, not a problem. The sun and bacteria or other animals will break it down. It will decay. It will become nutrients that absorb into the ground and used for plants and get back into the natural cycle of things. You can also use organic materials to compost. To compost means to, again, it's a recycling, but organic materials. You're getting the nutrients out of them. You're creating like nutrient-rich soil that you can then use as fertilizer to grow plants and things like that. So biodegradable, this is good, very good for the environment. Things like plastic or metal, anything that's non-organic is non-biodegradable. Means it can't break down, it can't be reused by nature. So these are the things that hurt the environment, hurt nature, not good things. Biodiversity. So again, we're looking at bio as a prefix. It means life. Diversity of life. So a variety of life forms. So people always talk about like environmental diversity. Use this word, biodiversity, when you're talking about different things, animals, plants, insects, etc. And again, you're going to use this word in combination with habitat. A habitat is the environment of living things, a particular environment. So for example, certain animals live in forest habitats. Certain animals live in jungle habitats, desert habitats, mountain habitats, all kinds of different habitats. If you're talking about the Earth, the planet, this is the habitat of all living things, carbon-based organisms like humans, animals, plants. Be careful not to confuse habitat with habitation. Habitation, you're going to use to talk about people, where people live. Homes, houses, etc. And inhabitant, an inhabitant you can use with habitation or with habitat. So the inhabitants of a habitat are all the living things in that particular environment. Okay? If you're talking about the forest, all the animals, all the birds, all the insects that live in that habitat. They are all inhabitants. Now, ecology and ecosystem. People often confuse these two words, but they are different. Ecology, mostly we use to talk about the study of ecosystems. Let's go to ecosystem first. An ecosystem is the environment and everything inside of it. You can talk about particular ecosystems, just like you can talk about habitat. So habitat and ecosystem could be synonyms. But we can use ecosystems to talk about non-living things as well. If you're talking about computers or a computer network within an office, you have this office's computer ecosystem. basically everything that is included inside that particular group, I guess you could say, that works together. Ecology is the study of this particular group or place, and it's also the relationships of everything inside that particular group or place. Okay, so within the ecosystem and then the ecosystem itself. Now, conservation and preservation. In most cases, you can use these as synonyms if you're talking about basically protecting the environment or protecting something. There is a slight difference though. Conservation basically means using wisely. So for example, if you're looking at forests, let's look at forests again. A conservation approach means every time you cut down a tree, you plant a new tree. That way, one tree is less, one tree is up, everything balances out, and you can maintain, or you can use this forest for a very long time. Preservation means just keeping it from harm. So for example, if you have a forest and all the trees in the forest are 500 years old, if you cut one down, if you plant a new one, it will take 500 years to replace. So that doesn't really make much sense. So these forests with the 500-year-old trees, we want to preserve. Means we don't cut the trees at all. We just keep it as it is and leave it alone and save it, basically, protect it. Next, we have the food chain. The food chain is basically who or what eats what. So we have humans are generally at the top of the food chain. We can eat everything around us, and nothing really eats us. And carnivores, so when you're talking about in the jungle or the forest or whatever, the lion, for example, is the top of the food chain in the safari areas, in the wild, in the jungle. If you're talking about the ocean, you have the great white shark or the killer whale at the top of the food chain. They eat smaller animals, which eat smaller animals, which eventually you get small enough that they start eating plants. Okay? So plants are at the bottom. So you have grass, the cow eats the grass, humans eat the cow, and that's 3 steps in the food chain. When you're talking about wildlife, so people use this word a lot, wildlife, but you can also use marine life if you're talking specifically about the ocean. You can use flora and fauna. Flora, plants, fauna, animals. This is a very good collocation. So these are all collocations here. This bottom line here is all collocations. And then you have eco-friendly. So everybody uses environmentally friendly. You can also say eco-friendly just to have a little bit of variety in your language. So now let's look a little bit at pollution. And when we talk about pollution, means air, land, sea, etc. And we also have pollutants, the things that create pollution, the things that pollute, basically the verb. Now, greenhouse gases, I think most people have heard this expression before. A lot of people separate the 2 words, greenhouse. If you say greenhouse, you're talking about a house that's green, and that doesn't really mean anything. So make sure you understand 1 word, and gases. This is the spelling of the plural. A greenhouse gas or many greenhouse gases. They include carbon dioxide. Again, dioxide is 1 word. Don't split dioxide, which I've seen many people do. Methane is another common one. If you think about livestock, like sheep and cows, they eat a lot of grass and they release some sort of gases from parts of their body. That gas is called methane. Aerosols, this is the gas that comes in cans. If you have like hairspray and you press the button and the spray comes out, there's a gas inside the can that pushes the spray out. That gas is aerosol. These are very bad for the environment. And basically all hydrocarbons, anything that comes out of burning. When you burn coal or oil or wood, any fossil fuels, then you're releasing hydrocarbons into the atmosphere. And generally, we can see this in the air as smog. When you're outside and the air is not very clear, it's not smoke and it's not a cloud, but it looks like a little bit of a combination of both. That's just pollution, and we call that smog. And all of these things, when we're talking about polluting with carbon-based gases or materials, we are leaving our carbon footprint. So environmentalists and people who want to save the environment basically want to reduce human beings' carbon footprint, basically what we leave behind in terms of carbon on the earth. Now, when you're talking about gases, they usually are released as fumes. So if you think about your car, from the exhaust in the back, you're releasing gases. These are called fumes, or they're called emissions. And the verb is to emit. And this comes from burning fossil fuels. And again, fossil fuels, coal, oil, gas, things like that. Things that have been around in the earth for a long time, and we burn them. Next, when we talk about farming or growing vegetables and fruit, farmers use a lot of pesticides. These are chemicals that basically kill insects and other like bacteria and viruses that harm the plants. So they spray them with pesticides or chemical fertilizers that kill all these organisms, and these also pollute the environment. The chemicals get into the ground, into the water, they spread, they do a lot of damage, especially to humans and animals. Solvents. These are liquids that are combinations of chemicals used to work with other chemicals, okay? They're mostly not water. That's the key here. So when you're talking about solvents, you're talking something like paint thinner. If you have paint on your wall and you want to remove it, you use paint thinner, you make it like very soft, and then you just wipe it away. Very, very bad, very toxic chemical. Detergents like soap, dishwasher soap, laundry soap, these are all bad for the environment. Now, when we're talking about waste, we can talk about solid waste, which is basically garbage or things that are left over from use. Toxic waste, again, pesticides, emissions, these are all toxic, like poison. Hazardous basically means dangerous, right? So when you're talking about manufacturing, the manufacturing process, companies that produce things, eventually they use oil, they use chemicals, they use all kinds of things to make their products, especially plastic, and there's always a byproduct. There's something left over from the production process, and then they have to get rid of that. Sometimes it spills into the rivers, sometimes it just goes into the ground and is absorbed by the ground, spreads in the water line, very bad. Landfills. So if you ever wonder what happens to all the garbage that you throw out at home, you put it in a bag, you put it in a box, you don't think about it again. But in some countries just burn all the garbage and then they're basically adding to the greenhouse gases. Other countries, they take all this garbage and put it in a landfill. So it just is an empty area and they just throw all the garbage there. And then you have mountains of garbage. Some of it is biodegradable, which is fine. It's just basically decays and goes back into the ground. A lot of it is toxic and it just goes into the ground, into the water, and spreads. Now, leak, spill, and slick. When we use these words when we talk about oil that is spilled basically accidentally. If you have a ship carrying oil and it hits an iceberg and the ship breaks and all the oil comes out, on the surface of the water, you'll see a large slick coming out of the container. That's called a leak or a spill. And then the slick is basically what you'll see on top of the water, sometimes on top of the land. Mostly we're talking about oil or toxic waste, very poisonous, covers the animals, the wildlife, the marine life, and eventually gets into our food chain. Okay? And next we have sewage. So all the water in your toilet, in your bathtub, in your sink goes down all these little pipes and all the drains, or in the streets you'll see the sewage drains. All the water goes in with all the dirt and all the chemicals and all the poisons, and it gets into the sewage. Now, in most cases, it will go through a treatment plant. The treatment plant will use solvents or all kinds of different chemicals to clean the water and recycle it and get it back into use. So you can shower again with clean water. But the more sewage you have, the more bacteria and viruses and all kinds of nasty things grow in there. If they're not properly treated, they get into the water system, they spread the poison. Some verbs. To contaminate basically means to make unpure, unclean. Pollute, we already know, the same idea. To threaten. So all of these different pollutants threaten the environment, they threaten the animal life, the flora and fauna, they threaten humans because they're poison, right? They're not good to ingest. And some species become endangered, so pollution endangers some species. If you cut down forests, certain birds and animals have nowhere to live, their habitat is destroyed. If you let more and more pollution enter the environment, you're threatening wildlife, you're endangering certain species. Okay, so far so good. Now, some consequences. If you put all of this together, what happens? Well, first of all, let's talk about some natural disasters. These are things that happen that are very catastrophic, that create a lot of damage, and they're natural. And I'll talk about that in a second. So the main ones are earthquake, volcanoes, typhoons, tornadoes, hurricanes, monsoon, tsunami, blizzard, etc. The problem is, these are natural. There's nothing we can really do to stop these things. But the more we pollute and the more we destabilize the environment, the higher the frequency and the greater the intensity of these disasters. It doesn't mean that if we stop polluting, these things will stop happening, but now they are happening more regularly. They're happening faster, and when they happen, they're stronger, and they create a lot more damage than they used to in the past. So we are contributing to the intensity of these disasters. And again, if you don't want to talk about disaster, some synonyms: catastrophe, a very bad thing that happens; calamity, synonym, devastation. Devastation is like a physical destruction. When you have an earthquake and the whole country shakes and everything breaks and all you see is rocks because all the buildings fell down and all the trees fell down, that is devastation, which is a catastrophe for humans and animals, etc. A calamity is a very tragic, very bad thing. Okay, it makes you sad, basically. Some other things that human actions cause, and pollution also causes: deforestation. The more trees we cut down, the less forests there are. The more pollution we introduce into the systems, into the ecosystems, trees die out, plants die out, there's less forests. Desertification, which is a strange word. Deserts actually grow, they spread. So you have very, very dry land. And then you're taking the water from the other areas, and then the dryness spreads, and then the desert becomes bigger. That's what this is. And erosion. As plants die, there's nothing holding the ground together, right? So the ground starts to break apart, or erode is the verb. So if the ground starts to fall apart and then starts to fall. So with all these things, deforestation, desertification, erosion, we have droughts and famines. A drought means when there's no rainfall for a long time or no water is available in a certain area, the land becomes dry, nothing can grow. When nothing can grow, then you have famine. People can't eat. There's mass starvation in a particular area. The hotter the earth gets, glaciers melt, the ice caps on the mountains melt, and then you have flooding. So all the water from the mountains and the glaciers, they come rushing down and they make land full of water, and that's flooding. Erosion, there's no trees to hold the ground together, so landslides. Land slides off the side of a mountain and crushes villages below it. Of course, dry and no rain makes fire. Another way to talk about the drought is you talk about parched or arid land. Means parched is like very thirsty, very dry. Arid also means very dry. And you talk about fertile or infertile. Fertile land means it's very easy to grow things there, like plants, vegetables, etc. Infertile, if the land becomes too dry and there's no nutrients in it, you can't grow anything there, then you have your famines again. Again, pollution endangers species. So an endangered species is a group of animals that is about to disappear and will never come back, or it will die out, or it will go extinct. So these are all more or less synonyms, and depending how you use them. Obviously, verbs and this is an adjective with a noun, okay? So a lot of new words for you here. Here are just some examples of how to use them in a paragraph, right? So all the words that I listed or that I spoke about here, I put into italics so you can see them. Here's a paragraph. Look how many of these words I'm actually using in one paragraph. And here's a couple more. In one sentence, I can use a whole bunch of these words and a whole bunch of these words. Again, lexical resource is a very important part of your writing score in the IELTS and the TOEFL. Make sure you have a good variety of words. You don't want to necessarily force synonyms and you don't want to force words. Just make sure that you're using them at the correct context. Make sure there's a reason to use them, that they make sense, and give yourself a whole bunch of options to discuss all of these different types of topics. Okay? And that's basically it. Very straightforward. Start building your idea banks, start collecting vocabulary and questions and sample essays about the topics that you think might be on the exam, and start working them, and that's how you succeed, okay? If you have any questions about this video, please ask me in the YouTube comment section, and come back next week. I'll have more vocab, grammar, writing tips, all kinds of different stuff, okay? See you then. Bye-bye.